The desert sun crawled across the sky like a slow-moving beast, spilling heat over Dustfall Ridge until every stone, every cactus spine, and every grain of sand shimmered as if lit from within. Luke Mercer rode through in silence, his hat pulled low, sweat gathering along his brow, dust clinging to the dark leather of his coat. The wind rose in sharp bursts, carrying the scent of distant creosote and the restless hum of cicadas. He preferred the quiet out here, where the world stretched wide and empty, where a man could listen to his own thoughts and not have to answer to anyone. Luke had always been a solitary rider, not because he disliked people, not because the world had nothing left to offer, but because the war had carved out a hollow in him so deep he feared anything that entered it might never escape. He'd seen things then, smoke curling over bodies, men crying out for brothers who never answered, friends fading from life as fast as light fades from dusk. When he came home, the town had celebrated him like a hero, but the cheers never reached his heart. In the end, he bought a quiet ranch on the far edge of nowhere, and that was how he intended to live the rest of his life. Today, he planned nothing more than a simple trip home after collecting supplies from the trading post. A bag of beans, a coil of fresh rope, a block of sulphurous cattle. Nothing unusual. But halfway across the ridge, something caught him. A sound so thin and fragile, he wondered at first if it was just the wind warping through the rocks. He slowed his horse, hand resting lightly on the saddle horn, listening. Then he heard it again. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the creak of saddle leather or the distant cry of a hawk. It was softer, human, a voice barely strong enough to exist. Luke's spine tensed. He turned his horse toward the canyon side, urging the animal forward despite the steepness of the trail. Each hoofstep sent pebbles tumbling over the edge, echoing faintly. The sound came again, broken, weakened, almost swallowed by the heat. He felt something shift inside him, a memory he didn't want, of another voice crying for help long ago, one he hadn't been able to reach in time. His jaw tightened. He nudged his horse carefully along the narrow ledge until he came to a point where the canyon opened below like a hidden wound in the earth. That was when his breath caught. Far beneath him, in the shadow of gnarled juniper trees, 5 Apache young women hung suspended upside down. Their long, dark hair brushed the dust. Their arms hung limp. The ropes binding their ankles were tied viciously tight, their skin marked by the strain. They were alive, but only barely, murmuring under breaths that trembled with exhaustion. The sight hit Luke like a hammer. He had heard stories about the outlaws who claimed this canyon, men who attacked travelers, raided settlements, and terrified tribes. But stories were one thing. Seeing the cruelty with his own eyes was another. For a moment, Luke didn't move. He simply watched, letting the truth settle in. He knew the outlaws might be near. He knew stepping into their territory alone was foolish at best and fatal at worst. But he also knew what it felt like to hear cries for help and do nothing. He couldn't carry that weight again. He took a steadying breath and guided his horse down the zigzagging path into the canyon. The descent was steep, and several times his horse slipped on loose shale, but Luke held tight, whispering calm words into its mane. The heat intensified as they dropped lower, the air thickening until every breath felt heavy. When he reached the hollow floor, the young women stirred weakly, their eyes barely open. One girl, her hair braided with faded beads, whispered something in Apache too soft for him to understand. Another's lips were cracked from thirst. They were conscious, but only just. Luke dismounted, boots sinking into the hot sand. He approached them slowly, not wanting to startle anyone in their fragile state. One woman managed to turn her head slightly, her gaze meeting his with a flicker of disbelief. "You," she rasped, "you should not be here." "Maybe not," Luke answered quietly, drawing his knife, "but I'm here now." He reached for the first rope, sawing through it with controlled movements. As soon as it snapped, he caught the woman's body carefully, lowering her to the ground before she could fall. Her breath shuddered against his shoulder, and he could feel the tremor of fear and relief running through her. He repeated the motion again and again, freeing each woman in turn. Their bodies were weak from the blood rushing to their heads for too long, so he laid each one gently in what little shade the canyon offered. When he cut down the 5th woman, She tried to sit on her own, but dizziness overtook her and she slumped forward. Luke caught her before she hit the ground. "You're safe now," he murmured. Her breathing steadied enough for her to speak. "I am Naya. They took us at sunrise. They wanted our people afraid." Luke felt something in him twist. Not anger. Something more grounded. A sense of injustice that had lived inside him for years. Ever since he watched innocent men die in the war. He reached for his canteen and offered it to Naya. She drank slowly, carefully, then handed it to the others. He rationed the water, making sure they all had a little. He helped the strongest of them to her feet, guiding her toward his horse. The other four leaned on one another, barely able to stand. Luke began making a mental map of the safest route out of the canyon. He could carry one woman on the horse, maybe two, but guiding all five out would take time. Time he wasn't sure they had. As he prepared to lift Naya into the saddle, a sharp, whistling sound cut through the air. High, piercing, unmistakable. Luke froze mid-motion. That sound wasn't natural. It wasn't a bird call or a gust of wind. It was a signal, a warning, a call to gather. The outlaws were coming back. Luke's heartbeat slowed, not from fear, but from calculation. He scanned the canyon ridges. Shadows shifted near the rim. He stepped forward, placing himself between the recovering women and the threat he knew was coming. His hand hovered near the revolver he had sworn never to use again. For years he kept it holstered, untouched, the metal a reminder of who he used to be. But now, the weight of his vow collided with the weight of 5 lives depending on him. The wind died. The canyon held its breath. And Luke Mercer knew he was no longer alone. The first outlaw appeared at the canyon rim, like a silhouette carved out of the blazing sky, a rifle resting against his shoulder and a smirk curled across his mouth. Luke Mercer spotted him from below. The man's stance loose and arrogant, the kind of confidence only someone with cruelty in their bones carried. Then 2 more figures joined him. Then another pair. Within moments, 6 outlaws lined the ridge, their boots planted wide, their shadows stretching long over the canyon wall. The 5 Apache women behind Luke tensed instantly, their breath quickening, exhaustion fighting against instinctive fear. Luke stepped a pace forward, creating a human shield between them and the danger above. "You lost, rancher?" the leader called, voice carrying easily in the canyon's natural acoustics. He spoke with a lazy drawl, but there was venom beneath it. "Or did you decide to borrow something that belongs to us?" Luke held the outlaw's stare. "They don't belong to you." The outlaw laughed. It was a slow, cruel sound, widening his grin until the sun glinted off the gold tooth in his mouth. "Everything in this canyon belongs to us." Luke drew in a breath, so steady it surprised even him. "Not today." The outlaw's grin faded. His eyes narrowed, and for a heartbeat, the whole canyon seemed to freeze. No wind, no birds, no sound from the women behind Luke. Only the tension of 2 men staring each other down across a gulf of stone and shadow. Then the outlaws began to descend. They moved like a pack of wolves, splitting off into smaller groups to circle the basin. Dust kicked up in clouds as they slid down the rocky slopes, weapons drawn, steps confident. Luke quickly guided the Apache women toward a cluster of large boulders near the back wall of the hollow. Their strength was limited, but their resolve wasn't. He handed his knife to the strongest among them, a woman with sharp eyes who still had enough fight left in her to use it if necessary. Luke checked the revolver he hadn't fired in years. His hands trembled, not from fear of death, but from fear of becoming again the man he had once been in the war. A man who reacted first and dealt with regret later. A man who believed violence was the only language others understood. He had sworn to himself he would never let that part of him surface again. But today, the world wasn't giving him a choice. It was either defend the innocent or abandon them. And Luke Mercer did not abandon people. The outlaws reached the canyon floor with a chorus of shouts and crunching gravel. One lunged at Luke immediately, swinging a fist. Luke dodged, grabbed the man's wrist, and used his momentum to throw him hard into the dirt. Another rushed in from the left with a knife, but Luke deflected him with his forearm and shoved him against the rocks. He avoided using the revolver as long as he could, fighting with quick, controlled movements meant to disable, not destroy. He wasn't trying to win a war. He was trying to buy time. The Apache women, though weakened, aided him in small but crucial ways. One struck at an outlaw's leg with a rock, slowing him down long enough for Luke to disarm him. Another screamed sharply, distracting a man about to ambush Luke from behind. Even their movements, slow and shaky, carried a determination born from survival. The canyon echoed with grunts, scuffling boots, and the metallic ring of weapons glancing off stone. Luke's revolver stayed in his grip, but he lifted it only to fire warning shots into the sky. The sound cracked to the canyon like thunder, startling two horses tied to the canyon entrance and causing them to rear wildly. A few outlaws lost their nerve instantly and scrambled back toward the slopes, slipping on loose rock in their haste to escape. But the leader didn't flee. He stood firm near the canyon's far wall, raising his pistol with a steady hand, his expression twisting with spite. "You think you're some kind of savior?" he snarled. Luke exhaled. "No, just a man doing what's right." The leader pulled the trigger. The bullet struck the ground inches from Luke's boot, kicking up a burst of dust. Before the outlaw could fire again, Naya, still weak but fueled by desperation, lunged forward and grabbed his arm. Her grip wasn't strong, but it was enough to throw his aim off. That single split second gave Luke the opening he needed. He stepped forward, struck the outlaw's wrist, and sent the pistol clattering across the canyon floor. The leader collapsed to his knees, breath knocked out of him. Luke stood over him, gun in hand. He didn't aim it at the man. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes was enough. Calm, unshaken, resolute. "Take your men," Luke said quietly, "and get out of this canyon." The leader glared up at him with pure hatred, but something in Luke's stance, something steady and immovable, forced the outlaw to reconsider. He spat into the dust, then backed away slowly, motioning to the few who were still standing. One by one, the outlaws retreated, scrambling up the rocky slopes and disappearing into the ridges like retreating shadows. Only when the last figure melted into the horizon did Luke lower his gun. Silence returned to the canyon. A silence different from before, lighter, cleaner, as though the land itself had released a hell breath. Luke holstered his revolver and immediately turned to the women. They were exhausted, shaken, and yet relief shone through their eyes. He offered them water again, letting each sip slowly revive them. Naya leaned back against the rock, eyes closed, breathing deeply. "You saved us," she whispered after a moment. Luke shook his head softly. "No, you stayed alive long enough to be saved. That's strength." The women exchanged tired but grateful looks. One of them began to cry, not loudly, just a soft release of fear that had been trapped too long. Luke knelt beside them, checking their injuries, supporting the weakest as they tried to stand. Then he helped them onto his horse, placing two in the saddle, guiding the others on foot. The journey out of the canyon took time. The sun dipped lower, the sky shifting from blazing gold to gentle rose. As they reached the open lands beyond the canyon, the air cooled and the women seemed to breathe easier. Not long after, Apache scouts appeared on the horizon, racing toward them with urgency and fear etched into their faces. When they saw the young women alive, their expressions broke into overwhelming relief. Elders and family members rushed forward as Luke gently lowered the women from a horse. They surrounded them with blankets, water, and whispered prayers. Naya stepped toward Luke, her face still pale but her voice steady. "You risked your life for us," she said softly. Luke looked toward the fading sun. Felt like the only right thing left to do. Naya nodded slowly. "Then let this day be remembered between our people. Not as a debt, but as a reminder that courage grows where compassion is planted." Luke met her eyes, a quiet understanding passing between them. Then he turned and walked toward his horse. For the first time in years, the silence inside him no longer felt like a wound. It felt like peace beginning to heal.